Rain lashed against her bruised skin as she collapsed in the mud, utterly broken. Footsteps heavy enough to shake the earth stopped before her. A massive, cloaked figure knelt, wiping a tear from her cheek with a clawed finger, and whispered into the storm, "From now on, you're mine." Records from the late autumn of 1342, hidden deep within the parish archives of Northumbria, speak of a night so violent that the villagers believed the heavens were tearing open, but the true storm was not in the sky. It was unfolding in the treacherous expanse of the Whispering Woods. Rachel Harding, the 19-year-old daughter of Lord Thomas Harding, was running for her life. Her lungs burned with every jagged breath, and the sodden velvet of her emerald gown dragged through the underbrush like a heavy chain. Just hours prior, she had been a captive in her own home, at Ashbourne Manor, betrothed to Lord Nathaniel George to settle a crippling family debt. Nathaniel was a man of impeccable standing in the king's court, but behind closed doors he was a monster. His wealth was built on extortion, and his cruelty was a closely guarded secret that Rachel bore in the form of fading bruises on her ribs. The catalyst for her desperate flight had occurred shortly after sunset. Rachel had slipped into Nathaniel's study to retrieve a stolen locket her deceased mother had left her. Instead of the jewelry, she found a ledger. It was a detailed, damning manifest, proving that Nathaniel was financing a mercenary army to ambush the northern clans, specifically the Montgomery bloodline. Nathaniel planned to use poisoned grain to wipe out an entire settlement and claim the silver-rich mountains of the north. When Nathaniel's heavy boots echoed in the hallway, Rachel had no choice. She seized the ledger, shoved it into the bodice of her dress, and threw herself from the first-floor window onto the soft earth below. Now the forest was pitch black, illuminated only by jagged flashes of lightning. The rain was freezing a relentless torrential downpour that turned the forest floor into a swamp. Behind her, she could hear the distant, terrifying baying of Nathaniel's hunting hounds. He had discovered the theft. He knew that if the ledger reached the Northern King, his head would be on a spike before the week's end. Rachel tripped over an exposed root, crying out in agony as her ankle twisted unnaturally. She tumbled down a steep embankment, sliding through wet clay and jagged stones until she crashed into the trunk of a massive oak tree. The ledger remained pressed tightly against her chest, but her physical strength was entirely spent. She tried to push herself up, but her arms trembled and gave out. The rain beat down on her, washing away the mud and blood from her face. Despair, cold and absolute, washed over her. She was a nobleman's daughter who had never known the harshness of the wild, and now she was going to die in it. She squeezed her eyes shut, letting the tears mix with the freezing rain. She wept for her mother, for the life she was supposed to have, and for the agonizing betrayal of her own father who had sold her to a tyrant. Then the hound stopped barking. It wasn't a gradual fade into the distance. It was an abrupt, chilling silence, as if the dogs had been simultaneously muted by a predator far greater than themselves. A low, vibrating growl reverberated through the earth, settling deep in Rachel's chest. She opened her swollen eyes. Emerging from the impenetrable darkness of the tree line were pairs of glowing amber eyes. Wolves. But these were not the mere woodland predators depicted in tapestries. These beasts were colossal, their shoulders reaching the height of a grown man's chest, their fur matted with rain, and muscle shifting beneath their coats like liquid steel. Rachel froze her breath, catching in her throat. She had fled a human monster, only to be torn apart by the beasts of the wild. But the wolves did not attack. They parted, bowing their massive heads in an undeniable show of submission. Footsteps slow and rhythmic crushed the fallen branches. A man stepped into the small clearing. He was impossibly tall, broad-shouldered, and draped in a heavy cloak of dark fur that repelled the rain. His hair was completely soaked, plastered against a face that looked as though it had been carved from granite. A jagged scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw adding to the terrifying aura that radiated from him. This was Tristan Montgomery, the Alpha King of the North, a man whispered about in tavern corners as a warlord, a savage and a demon who fed on the flesh of his enemies. Tristan stood over her, his golden brown eyes piercing through the darkness, locking onto her frail, shivering form. He noted the mud on her face, the tear in her expensive dress, and the utter hopelessness in her eyes. He did not ask what a lady of the South was doing in his territory. He did not ask her name. He crouched down, his massive frame dwarfing her. Rachel flinched, bracing for a fatal strike. Instead, he reached out with a hand that was calloused and unusually warm. His fingers' nails slightly elongated, and sharp brushed a wet strand of hair from her face, wiping away a fresh tear that had just escaped her eyelashes. "Please," Rachel choked out her voice, barely a whisper against the roaring storm. "I have nowhere left to go." Tristan's gaze darkened, a possessive fire igniting in the depths of his amber eyes. He leaned in, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble that sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "From now on, you're mine." He didn't wait for her to reply. Tristan scooped her into his arms as effortlessly as if she weighed nothing at all. The heat radiating from his body was unnatural, acting like a furnace against her freezing skin. Overwhelmed by exhaustion, fear, and the bizarre safety of his embrace, Rachel's vision faded to black. Warmth. It was the first sensation that broke through the void of Rachel's unconsciousness. Not the biting heat of a hearth fire, but a deep, enveloping warmth. She opened her eyes slowly, the light of a crackling fireplace making her blink. She was lying in a massive bed, piled high with pelts and thick woolen blankets. The room was expansive, built of heavy dark stone, yet it felt strangely inviting. Rich tapestries depicting ancient battles and howling wolves adorned the walls. This was no barbaric encampment. It was an ancient, formidable stronghold. "You've slept for 2 days, little bird." A gentle voice spoke from the corner. Rachel bolted upright, her heart hammering against her ribs, but a sharp pain in her ankle made her wince. An older woman with kind eyes and silver hair woven into a tight braid stepped forward, holding a goblet of steaming broth. "Peace, child. You are safe in Caerleon Keep," the woman said, handing Rachel the goblet. "I am Martha. Lord Tristan brought you to me himself." Half frozen and clinging to a leather-bound book as if it were the Holy Grail. The ledger. Rachel gasped, looking frantically around the room. "It is safe." A deep voice resonated from the heavy oak doorway. Rachel looked up. Tristan Montgomery stood in the frame, dressed in a dark tunic that stretched tight across his broad chest, a leather belt resting on his hips, holding a formidable broadsword. In the daylight, he was even more intimidating. His jaw was square and dusted with dark stubble, and his amber eyes held an ancient, calculating intelligence. Martha bowed her head respectfully and quickly slipped out of the room, closing the heavy door behind her. Tristan walked slowly toward the bed. Rachel pulled the furs up to her chin, her knuckles turning white. "You read it," Rachel stated, trying to keep her voice from trembling. "I did," Tristan replied, pulling up a heavy wooden chair and sitting beside the bed. Nathaniel George's entire strategy. Names of his financiers, the routes his mercenaries planned to take, and the poisons he purchased to cripple my people. "You handed me the kingdom's salvation, Rachel Harding." Rachel swallowed hard. "You know who I am. I make it my business to know everything that happens on my borders. I know your father signed you away to pay for his gambling debts. I know George has a reputation for breaking his brides." Tristan's jaw clenched, a muscle feathering near his scar. A low, barely audible growl rumbled in his chest, making Rachel's eyes widen. "And I know that he will burn down half the country to get that ledger back." "Then you must let me go," Rachel pleaded. "If he finds out I am here, he will bring the king's army to your doorstep. I am a wanted thief now. Tristan leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. He looked at her not with pity, but with a fierce, unwavering intensity. Do you truly believe I fear a coward like George or the Southern King? Before Rachel could answer, a loud, urgent knock rattled the door. My lord! A guard's muffled voice called out. An envoy from the south has arrived at the gates. It is Sir Reginald riding under George's banner. He demands an audience. Rachel's blood ran cold. Reginald was Nathaniel's right-hand man, a cruel knight who took pleasure in doing Nathaniel's dirty work. He found me, she whispered, panic rising in her throat. Tristan stood up, his massive frame blocking the light from the fire. Rest, Rachel. I will handle Sir Reginald. No. Rachel grabbed his sleeve. The fabric was rough, but beneath it, his arm felt like solid iron. Tristan, please. You don't understand how ruthless they are. Tristan looked down at her hand, and for a fleeting second, the hardened warlord softened. He gently covered her trembling hand with his own. You are in my territory now, and as I told you in the woods, you are mine to protect. He turned and strode out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. Driven by a desperate need to know her fate, Rachel forced herself out of bed. She ignored the stabbing pain in her bound ankle and hobbled toward the heavy stone balcony that overlooked the courtyard below. The cold morning air hit her face as she peered over the edge. In the muddy courtyard, Sir Reginald sat atop a heavily armoured war-horse, surrounded by a dozen armed mercenaries. Tristan stood at the bottom of the keep's steps, completely unarmed, flanked only by two of his guards. Lord Montgomery. Reginald sneered, his voice echoing off the stone walls. I come on behalf of Lord Nathaniel George. We are tracking a runaway thief, a girl with dark hair and a green dress. We tracked her footprints to your border before the rain washed them away. Hand her over, and we will consider this a misunderstanding. Tristan did not move. He stood with a calm, terrifying stillness. There is no thief here, Reginald. Only a guest under the protection of House Montgomery. Reginald's face reddened with anger. He drew his sword, the steel scraping loudly against the scabbard. Do not play games with me, savage. She is Lord George's property. By the laws of the king, keeping her is an act of treason. Hand her over, or we will take her by force. A heavy silence descended upon the courtyard. Then Tristan laughed. It was a dark, humourless sound that chilled Rachel to the bone. Tristan stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and Reginald's warhorse. The beast nervously stamped its hooves, sensing something unnatural. Tristan looked up at the night, and from the balcony, Rachel gasped. Tristan's eyes had shifted. The golden brown had turned into a luminous, burning amber. His jaw seemed to elongate slightly, and the veins in his neck pulsed wildly. When he spoke, his voice boomed with an inhuman resonance, carrying the weight of a natural disaster. Tell George, Tristan roared, his voice layered with a monstrous dual timbre, that if he steps 1 foot into my territory, I will not just kill him. I will tear him apart with my bare hands. Rachel Harding is under the protection of the Alpha King. She is my mate. The mercenaries visibly recoiled. The warhorse bucked in absolute terror, nearly throwing Reginald to the mud. Reginald struggled to regain control, his face pale with sudden horrifying realization. The myths were true. The Montgomery bloodline was cursed. They were Lycans. You are monsters, Reginald stammered, spurring his horse backward. We are, Tristan agreed, his fangs briefly catching the morning light. Now run before I lose my temper. Reginald and his men didn't hesitate. They spurred their horses and fled through the gates, galloping madly back toward the southern border. Rachel stood on the balcony, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. Tristan turned around and looked directly up at her. Even from a distance, she could see the glowing amber of his eyes fading back to their normal state. He had claimed her as his mate to protect her. Or had he, the possessive heat in his gaze, suggested it was more than just a political maneuver? Rachel realized with a mixture of profound terror and an undeniable magnetic pull that she had traded a human monster for a supernatural one. And the most dangerous part of it all was that she felt safer here in the den of the wolf than she ever had in her entire life. Fear wrestled with fascination in Rachel's heart as she retreated from the balcony, her bare feet cold against the rough-hewn stone floor. The echoes of Tristan's monstrous roar still vibrated in her bones, a terrifying reminder that the man who had carried her through the storm was a predator of ancient legend. Yet as the heavy oak door swung open and Tristan re-entered her chambers, the monster vanished. In its place stood a man looking surprisingly vulnerable, his broad shoulders tense, waiting for her to scream or flee. Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Tristan remained by the door, deliberately keeping his distance. He knew what he looked like to a southern lady, a brute, a savage, a cursed creature of the night. "You did not have to lie to Sir Reginald," Rachel said softly, breaking the quiet. "Claiming me as your mate, it will only enrage Nathaniel further. He considers me his property." Tristan's amber eyes flared a flash of undeniable heat, replacing his guarded expression. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping just inches from her. The sheer size of him was overwhelming, but Rachel did not step back. "I did not lie. Rachel," Tristan murmured, his voice dropping to a gravelly timbre that sent a shiver racing down her spine. "My wolf recognized you the moment I caught your scent in the Whispering Woods. We do not choose our mates for political gain, nor do we buy them to settle debts. The bond is forged by fate. You are mine to protect not as property, but as my equal, my Luna." Rachel's breath hitched. In the south, she was a pawn, a ledger entry to be traded. Here in the harsh, unforgiving north, the most dangerous warlord in the kingdom was offering her reverence. She looked up at his face, tracing the jagged scar with her eyes. Tentatively, she reached up her small, pale fingers, brushing against the rough stubble of his jaw. Tristan closed his eyes, leaning into her touch, with a desperate, devastating gentleness that completely betrayed his fearsome reputation. "Nathaniel will not stop," Rachel whispered, grounding them back in the dangerous reality. "He has the ear of King Edward. If he spins a tale of you kidnapping a nobleman's bride, the royal army will march alongside his mercenaries. You will be facing a slaughter." Tristan opened his eyes, the softness hardening into tactical steel. "Then we prepare for war. But he will not catch us blindly." Over the next fortnight, Caerleon Keep transformed from a quiet stronghold into a bustling fortress. Blacksmiths worked day and night, the rhythmic ringing of hammers echoing through the valleys. The northern clans, loyal to the Montgomery bloodline, answered their alpha's howl, pouring into the courtyard, men and women alike, all bearing the fierce, untamed spirit of the wolf. Rachel did not hide in her chambers. Instead, she took a seat at the heavy war council table alongside Tristan and his generals. Using the ledger she had stolen, she unraveled Nathaniel's entire military strategy. He relies heavily on a mercenary captain named Mercer. Rachel explained, pointing to a map spread across the wooden table, her finger tracing a valley pass. "Mercer favors heavy cavalry and siege engines, but they are slow. Nathaniel is also extremely paranoid. He keeps his supply lines incredibly short. If you ambush the wagons here at the crossing of the River Trent, his front line will starve in 3 days." The grizzled war chiefs exchanged impressed glances. Tristan stood at the head of the table, pride radiating from him so intensely that the air felt thick with it. He placed a heavy hand on Rachel's shoulder, a silent derechiltion to his men. "She is our queen, and she is brilliant." But their preparations were violently interrupted on a moonless Tuesday night. The warning bells of the southern watchtower began to toll frantically, cutting through the freezing night air. Tristan, in his war chambers with Rachel, rushed to the window. The horizon was glowing with an unnatural, sickening light. Nathaniel George had not waited for the royal army. He had hired a zealot. Bishop Godfrey, a rogue cleric infamous for hunting supernatural creatures, had joined Nathaniel's ranks. Together they had mobilized a force of 500 men, armed with torches, silver-tipped spears, and crossbows loaded with bolts dipped in liquid wolfsbane. "They are moving faster than we anticipated," Tristan growled, strapping his heavy broadsword to his waist. "Godfrey is burning the surrounding forests to flush out our patrols." Rachel's heart hammered against her ribs. "Silver and wolfsbane, they know exactly what you are." Tristan turned to her, pulling her fiercely into his arms. The kiss he pressed to her lips was hard, desperate, and tasted of impending blood. "Stay in the inner keep with Martha. No matter what you hear, do not open the iron doors." The Battle of Caerleon Keep began with a deafening crash as Nathaniel's siege rams struck the outer wooden gates. Rain began to pour, a torrential downpour, identical to the night Rachel had fled into the woods. The courtyard turned into a chaotic bloodbath. The northern warriors fought with feral savagery. In the center of the carnage was Tristan. He had forsaken his human form, transforming into a towering, nightmarish beast of dark fur and razor-sharp claws. He moved with impossible speed, tearing through armored mercenaries as if they were made of parchment. From the narrow window of the inner keep, Rachel watched the horror unfold. The silver weapons were taking their toll. She saw brave Lycans fall, their bodies burning where the silver pierced their flesh. Tristan was a force of nature roaring through the storm, but even he was bleeding several silver bolts protruding from his massive shoulders. Then Rachel saw him. Nathaniel George. He wasn't in the mud fighting. He was slipping through a side postern gate, completely avoiding the main clash. He was flanked by 2 heavily armored knights heading straight for the inner keep. He wasn't here to win a war. He was here to retrieve his ledger and punish his runaway bride, Martha. Rachel said, her voice eerily calm as she turned away from the window. "Lock the doors behind me." "My lady, no, Lord," Tristan commanded. "I am the Luna of this pack," Rachel commanded, drawing a hidden dagger she had taken from the armory. "And I will not hide while my people die." Rachel slipped out of the safe room, moving silently down the dark stone corridors. She knew these halls now. She intercepted Nathaniel in the great hall. Nathaniel froze, water dripping from his expensive armor. He sneered, an ugly, cruel twist of his lips. "There you are, my little thief. Did you really think you could hide behind a pack of mangy dogs? Give me the ledger, Rachel, and I might just slit your throat quickly." "The ledger is already on its way to King Edward, carried by a swift rider through the northern pass." Rachel lied effortlessly, her chin held high. "Your treason is known, Nathaniel." Rage distorted Nathaniel's face. He lunged forward, drawing his long sword. Rachel dodged his initial swing, her smaller frame, allowing her to move quickly, but she was no warrior. Nathaniel backhanded her brutally, sending her crashing to the stone floor. The dagger skittered out of her reach. Nathaniel stood over her, raising his silver-forged blade for the killing blow. "Then I will simply have to silence the witness." Before the blade could fall, the heavy oak doors of the great hall exploded inward, reduced to splinters. A massive, shadowy figure filled the doorway. Tristan, still in his lichen form, was panting heavily, blood dripping from his matted fur. His amber eyes locked onto Nathaniel, and the guttural snarl that ripped from his throat shook the dust from the rafters. Nathaniel paled, taking a terrified step back. "Kill it!" he shrieked at his 2 guards. The knights rushed forward. Tristan didn't even use his claws. He simply grabbed them by their breastplates and hurled them across the room like ragged dolls, rendering them unconscious upon impact. Nathaniel swung his silver sword wildly as Tristan approached, managing to slice a shallow gash across the Lycan's chest. The silver hissed, burning the flesh, but Tristan didn't even flinch. He grabbed Nathaniel's wrist with a crushing grip, snapping the bone effortlessly. Nathaniel screamed, falling to his knees as the sword clattered to the floor. Tristan shifted back, the bones cracking and reforming, until he stood before Nathaniel in his human skin, though his eyes still burned with the wolf's fury. He grabbed Nathaniel by the throat, lifting him completely off the floor. "I told your envoy," Tristan whispered, his dual-toned voice dripping with lethal intent, "that if you stepped foot in my territory, I would tear you apart with my bare hands." "Tristan, stop!" Rachel's voice rang out. Tristan's grip paused, his chest heaving. He looked at Rachel, his murderous rage warring with his absolute devotion to his mate. Rachel stood up, wiping blood from her split lip. She walked over to the struggling, choking Nathaniel. "If you kill him now, you prove the Southern King right. You prove you are a monster. Let him stand trial. We have the ledger. We have the proof of his treason and his use of illegal poisons. Let the king execute him. That is true justice, and it protects our people from future retaliation." Tristan stared at her. The intelligence, the bravery, and the fierce protectiveness she held for his pack moved him beyond words. Slowly he loosened his grip, dropping Nathaniel, who collapsed on the stone floor, gasping and weeping in pain. "Bind him!" Tristan ordered his guards, who had just rushed into the hall. The battle outside had broken. Without Nathaniel's leadership, the mercenaries routed, fleeing back into the burning woods, heavily pursued by Tristan's warriors. Bishop Godfrey had perished in the mud, outmatched by the very creatures he sought to exterminate. As the guards dragged Nathaniel away, Tristan dropped to one knee before Rachel. He was covered in blood, mud, and ash. He looked up at her, waiting for the disgust, waiting for the fear that always followed his violence. Instead, Rachel sank to her knees beside him. She reached out her hands, gently framing his battered face. She leaned in and pressed her lips to his, a profound, sealing vow that tasted of rain and triumph. "You are my king," Rachel whispered against his lips. Tristan wrapped his arms around her waist, burying his face in her neck, breathing in the sweet, calming scent of his mate. "And from now on and until the end of my days, you are my everything." Together they rose, walking out to the balcony as the dawn broke over the mountains, painting the northern sky in hues of fiery gold. The storm had passed, and the reign of the Wolf Queen had just begun. Did Rachel and Tristan's fight for survival keep you on the edge of your seat? True love isn't just about romance. It's about finding the one who will stand by you against the darkest storms. If you loved this thrilling tale of betrayal, Lycan royalty, and fierce revenge, please hit that like button. Don't forget to share this story with your fellow romance and fantasy lovers, and subscribe to the channel for more epic, heart-pounding stories every single week.